Now, as the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act has cleared the Senate, it seems that it's heading its way towards US President Donald Trump's desk. How have officials in Beijing and Hong Kong reacted to this bill?
Oh, there's been strong reaction from both Hong Kong and Beijing. We had a spokesperson from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing accusing the US of meddling in the internal affairs of China and Hong Kong, warning them that they should avoid setting a fire that would only burn itself. And now the important part here is that this was delivered to a senior US diplomat, William Klein, who was summoned in order to receive this warning. In Hong Kong, we had a very strong reaction from the Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, who said that the passage of the bill was unwarranted and unnecessary, and said that it added fuel to the fire of what's going on in Hong Kong. So very strong reactions from government both in Beijing and Hong Kong.
So very heated rhetoric. So if these measures do become law, what would US authorities be allowed to do? John?
Well, first of all, it would allow the U.S. to sanction officials and organizations related to the Hong Kong government if they are perceived to not be acting in accordance with the one country, two systems framework and with the basic law that underpins that framework. For instance, Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, could be sanctioned, could be refused a visa to come to the United States. In addition, it requires an annual review of Hong Kong's status under the one country, two systems framework. If it's found that that China is not living up to its commitments under that agreement and that democracy and human rights are being eroded in Hong Kong, then the U.S. can remove the special trade status that Hong Kong enjoys with the United States at the moment. At the moment, Hong Kong exports to the U.S. are not subject to the same tariffs that Chinese mainland exports to the United States are. You remove that special trade status, Hong Kong exports to the United States are tariffed, and it could dramatically affect the business environment here in Hong Kong.
It's I think it's worth mentioning that a lot of what's in the new act already existed in the Policy Act of 1992. So with that in mind, this is seen by many experts as an example of Congress flexing its muscle. One person said to me is that while a lot of the tenets of the law already existed and the review process already existed, the current Congress wants to get its fingerprints on this, and when there's such anti-China sentiment running high in Washington, that I guess means that this is to the very forefront of people's attention, and it raises the temperature even more.
There is strong support for this bill from both major US political parties. Will President Trump veto this?
It's hard to say. On the one hand, it will be difficult for him to veto a bill that has such popular support, popular political support. The bill passed the Senate without a roll call vote, which means there was no significant opposition. On the other hand, he is very focused on getting a trade deal done with China. And if this bill passes the Congress, which it hasn't done yet, and I'll explain in a minute, if it passes, he may try to veto it. Having said that, given the strong congressional support, the Congress could override his veto and put it into law. Now, the Senate passed their version of the bill last night. The House passed another version of the bill last month. And the two bills are not identical, and they have to be reconciled into a single bill and repassed by both the House and the Senate. Then it would go to Trump's desk. So we're probably a week, several weeks at least, before a bill is put together and sent to Trump.
What we're hearing all the while is that Trump didn't want this to pass, that the Trump White House has pressured the office of Mitch McConnell, who's the Senate Minority Leader, to sit on this bill because he was afraid of anything that might scupper his precious and very hotly pursued trade deal with China. You know, what we hear is that from the Chinese side, one of the reasons why they like dealing with Trump is because he doesn't conflate these issues. We had an interview in the SCMP a couple of weeks ago with Long Yong-tu, who was China's chief negotiator with the US when they joined the World Trade Organization, and he said that the Chinese would love 4 more years of Trump because he doesn't pressure them on Hong Kong, because he doesn't pressure them on Taiwan. He doesn't conflate issues as sensitive as those with the purchase of soybeans with trade issues. This might be a turning point in that regard because it may see those very sensitive issues being dragged into the trade space.
Beijing promises heavy retaliation if the law does go into effect. What does this ultimately mean for US-China relations and the Hong Kong economy?
If you think about talk to people doing business here, and if you talk to the business community here, obviously they always say that all they want to do is business under uncertain environment. There's also a sense that rather than the actual content of the bill, they're concerned at the speed of the passage here. This was pretty rapid, which suggests to people that I speak to that there's very little sign of reconciliation, the popular support in the US, the deterioration of the situation in Hong Kong, the graphic images that have been played around the world from out of Hong Kong have clearly caught the imagination in the United States. So businesses are concerned that this has done lasting damage to the reputation of the city here. You talked about the potential for sanctioning. I mean, can you imagine? This is such a highly banked city that all the financial institutions in the world have a heavy presence in Hong Kong. This is way, way down the line, but if ever there were to be sanctions, economic sanctions, then that would be absolutely toxic to international companies and banks who want to have a presence here.
Let's be clear, Hong Kong is seen as a beachhead for companies that want to do business in China but want to enjoy the rule of law, the freedom of capital flows, and the freedom of information that is available in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is this bastion of Westernism right next to China, and so Western firms want to be here. 70% of the investment from the West that goes into China flows through Hong Kong. If there were sanctions, if relations were to deteriorate with Hong Kong and the US, or Hong Kong and the rest of the world, it would have dramatic economic effects for Hong Kong, obviously, but also for China and for the global economy.
Some very interesting times ahead for American and Hong Kong businesses ahead, so stay on top of that for us here at the South China Morning Post. Thank you both.
Thank you.